How do you become a game developer? Well, according to ZipRecruiter, the average game developer salary in the US was $108,471. But is this true, and how do you actually get there? And hey, I'm an indie game developer, and I've been working on a game for the last, I don't even know, 2 years, called Castlemancer, and it's a roguelike deck builder, which you should definitely wishlist on Steam. I also just released the first trailer for Castlemancer, both on YouTube and Steam, so check that out, see if you're interested in it, and yeah, give me suggestions in the comments down below. This goes without saying, but there are many different paths to get where you want to be, and no path is more correct than another. Also, most of this is based on my personal experience and knowledge, so keep that in mind and your journey may vary. So first, if your goal is to work at a AAA game studio like EA, Ubisoft, Xbox, the most obvious route would be to study computer science or some technical related major in college. This is more similar to the process for general software engineering type work at any sort of big tech company. There are definitely also pros and cons with this route, but some of the pros are generally more stability, guaranteed pay, and as an employee of one of these larger companies, you'll likely be a salaried employee with benefits. And despite the general negative opinion of a lot of AAA game studios, they tend to make a lot of money and pay staff. Maybe not pay them as well as they should, but at least are able to pay them. Some cons though are definitely the grind. It's a poorly kept secret about the working hours of a game developer, and with any large company, each individual employee has less say over the creative vision or the direction of a certain product than at a smaller company. Now, the next option is to go a step down to a AA studio. Now, these are smaller studios, but whereas the larger companies might just be looking for a certain school or degree, the smaller studios you might be able to join with less related degrees or just game dev projects. And as you move down the level from AAA to AA, you get more control and personal say in the game's outcome, but also less stability. Maybe the game studio had 1 or 2 decent successes and thus are able to keep the studio open, but they're not Apple or Google where they could seemingly scrap products all day long and still make billions of dollars. Another option is to go kind of like the pure indie route, and there's like 2 sub options within that. First is to go true small or solo indie dev and essentially bootstrap your way of funding your game. You can create a Kickstarter or a Patreon, start trying to develop a community around your game, and hopefully find success through that. This is obviously very hard and takes a long time with no guarantee of success, because essentially you're taking on the responsibility of both building a game as well as building a community for that game. Now, the second indie route is to build a prototype either alone or with a small team, and then try to present that to either game publishers or game investors. This would involve generally having something playable that you could demo to investors or publishers. If they like your idea, they would then fund the completion of your game, which would generally help cover your salary and the salaries of other employees you might need, but nothing is for free. So in exchange for this upfront payment, the investor or publisher would likely own a certain level of the profits of the game. Now, those are the 3 main pathways that I could think of, but I also kind of wanted to do a case study of an actual game studio for maybe those that are thinking about starting their own. So in November of 2024, I traveled to Iceland with my company Stash. I mentioned Stash in some previous videos, but quickly for context, I quit my job at Google in July of 2024 to join Stash. It's a small tech startup co-founded by Justin Kahn, who was the co-founder of Twitch, where we basically help game developers go more direct to consumer and really help them own the relationship they have with their players. Okay, so anyway, we go to Iceland, partly for work, but also partly to see everyone as the company is fully remote, so it's nice to see all the people I normally can. But while we were there, we had some meetings with CCP Games, which are not the Chinese Communist Party games, but the game studio behind EVE Online. For those unfamiliar, EVE Online is a sci-fi MMO and is one of the largest and oldest MMOs out there, still with a very dedicated player base. Now, according to MMOpopulation.com, EVE Online released in May of 2003 and has 10 million subscribers with roughly 167,000 daily players. Now, I actually tried playing EVE Online many years ago, and it's like extremely dense and complex. But they gave us a tour of their office in Reykjavik, and it was so cool to see so much passion in one space. They had swords on the wall for longtime employees, custom arcade machines, game art was scattering the entire office. We were also visiting on the launch day of their new expansion, so the whole office was wearing custom game merch. Just so cool to see, and I'm really appreciative that they let us kind of walk around and gave us a great experience, you know, showing us around. So I was walking around and, you know, taking it all in, and I'm like, dang, is this like what a real game developer kind of looks like? Because I started my game development journey, I don't know, 2-3 years ago at this point, and I've been a solo indie dev since then, and I've never really felt like a true game developer. And maybe other people can sort of resonate with that feeling where, you know, maybe it's an imposter syndrome or whatever you might want to call it. I never really felt like I was a true game developer. So when I was walking around, I'm like, dang, I'm like, is this like these are the true game developers here? So I did a little bit of research into CCP Games, and here's kind of a brief summarization of their story. So they were founded in 1997 by 3 people whose names I will absolutely butcher, so I won't even try. And they were founded with the purpose of making MMORPGs. The name CCP actually stands for Crowd Control Productions. And this next fact was actually really cool to find out. In order to finance the initial development of EVE Online, they built and released a board game called the Danger Game, which apparently did super well in Iceland. That sold 10,000 copies, which for reference, Iceland only had about 80,000 households. So essentially like 12% of Icelandic households owned this board game. Also, another fun fact, while they were continuing to seek funding, CCP Games helped in some of the pitch materials for the show Lazy Town. Eventually, 3 years after its founding in the year 2000, CCP's CEO was able to raise $2.6 million through Kopfing Bank and some private investors. And CCP initially had about 21 employees. Now in 2006, CCP Games began a merger agreement with White Wolf Publishing, which was a role-playing game and book publisher from the US. The merger essentially outlined that CCP would make online games based on White Wolf's IP, and White Wolf would make a card game based on EVE Online. Eventually, CCP Games established CCP North America, but eventually CCP conducted a large amount of layoffs worldwide, faced backlash for certain microtransactions in EVE Online, and eventually went through a restructuring and began focusing more on just EVE Online instead of other games. And then recently in 2018, CCP Games was actually acquired by Pearl Abyss, which are the publishers of Black Desert Online, for $425 million, which at the time of the acquisition, CCP Games had about 250 employees. And that is largely the story up until today. I'm sure I'm missing some details, but that's most of what I got from at least the Wikipedia page. Now, some of the games they actually developed were obviously EVE Online, which is still online today, Dust 514, which was released in 2013 and shut down in 2016, EVE Valkyrie, which was released in 2016 with servers shutting down in 2022, Gunjack, which was released in 2015, Gunjack 2, which was released in 2016, and Spark, which was released in 2017. I really liked this sort of case study of CCP Games because I think it's a good representation of the chaotic nature of game development. You know, from like the scrappy beginnings of creating a board game to finance your first game that's going to be an MMO, and then potentially doing a merger and then getting acquired by a different company, and then facing backlash, and then there's layoffs, and then big successes, and then more acquisitions, all of this sort of stuff. I felt like CCP Games was a really cool kind of informational history. It kind of reminds me of that show Silicon Valley, which is more like a tech startup kind of focus, but still has all of those kind of chaotic elements with, you know, big ideas, acquisitions, layoffs, pivoting on funding, all of this crazy stuff going on. And kind of CCP Games was like a real example of that. So thank you, CCP Games, for showing me your office. It was an absolute pleasure. Now, let me know if you still want to be a game developer after everything I mentioned. And if you're potentially thinking about starting down your own game development journey, then this video's sponsor, Skillshare, can help. Now, I've been wanting to step up my productivity game because being more productive generally can help in kind of all aspects, including my full-time job, YouTube, and my game dev projects, which is why I was going through Ali Abdal's productivity courses over on Skillshare. Now, Skillshare is the largest online learning community for creatives with thousands of classes led by industry experts across important areas for game dev like illustration, design, productivity, and more. Skillshare can help you take your career, skills, hobbies, passions, side hustles, including game dev, to the next level. This month, Skillshare is focusing on the theme of creativity creativity as a practice, kind of like how you might consider exercise for health and wellness. And in that sense, creativity is a muscle, and the more you exercise it, the more you grow. And I don't have to tell you how important creativity is in game development, not only when it comes to art, but game design and even game programming. Looking at a problem and seeing the creative ways to solve it. That's what Skillshare is here for. It's all about making the choice to learn, grow, and nurture a creative practice. Now, the first 500 people to use my link in the description below will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so get started today. And thank you to Skillshare for supporting the channel. I also want to kind of go back to what I said about being, like, having imposter syndrome about being a game developer. Now, I'm not a gatekeeper. If you want to call yourself a game developer, call yourself a game developer. I'm not saying you have to, like, meet any specific qualifications to be a game developer. I'm all in favor if you've, like, worked on one game and it's never been released, call yourself a game developer, you know? Do it. I'm not gatekeeping, you know, the title of game developer. That's just my opinion. You know, there's some more formal paths to become a quote-unquote game developer, but, you know, whatever you guys are feeling. We do a bad British accent at the end of every video. That's all from me. Hopefully, I see you in another one. Bye-bye.